All right, welcome back to another episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Stahl from Bram PD in Minnesota. Really looking forward to having him as today's guest. So, welcome to the show, Chief Stahl. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. How many years have you been in law enforcement total?
Uh, about 12 years as a law enforcement officer, but prior to that, I was an investigator with a medical examiner's office on the death investigation side. So
So, a long time.
a long time. Seen some things.
Give us a little bit of background. So, how did you get started and what has your career looked like so far?
Well, I started off as patrol. Well, prior to becoming a law enforcement officer, I was on a volunteer fire department, went into investigations on the fire side, and then went into death. I got recruited by the medical examiner to be a death investigator. Went to St. Louis University, did some classwork there, did that for quite a while, then transitioned over to the law enforcement side. Just kind of developed the career, and I've been here, doing this ever since. When I came to law enforcement, of course, I started as a patrol officer, went became an investigator, was promoted to lieutenant, now chief.
That's awesome. I'm curious in the context of leadership, what is the greatest thing or the greatest lesson that you've learned so far?
um, to be open and listen to people. you
Yeah.
know just don't walk in necessarily with a predetermined, this is the way it's going to be. Really, like I say, take it all in, because there's lots of different ways to solve the same problem. And just being open, and being able to discuss it really helps as a leader.
Yeah.
There's a time and a place where you just have to say, this is the way it's going to be, and then debrief or talk about it later. But for the most part, cooperation gets you a lot further.
I really like that. And I agree with you. I think sometimes we get in our own way, and I'm guilty of this, where, I'm really hard and fast with my train of thinking. And I think that we can all be that way. We only know what we know. And the way we think about things and the way we problem solve and the way we see the world is going to be based on our previous experiences and our past conditioning. And so when you have that ability to be a learner and have a growth mindset and be willing to listen to other people's perspectives, I think it goes a long way for a few different reasons. One, I have been humbled before where I thought my way was the best way. And because I had the ability to listen to other perspectives, I quickly realized the way that I was doing it maybe wasn't the best. There are other ways that could be more effective or efficient, but it also, I think, opens the doors for other people to feel comfortable talking to you about stuff, and they feel like you care about their opinions and the way that they see things or the way that they do things. And I think that creates more of that synchronicity with people because if someone comes up to me and they're like, "Hey, I have an idea," and I say, "No, I'm not interested in your ideas," do you think that they're ever going to come up to me again and try to share something? That there's that like block immediately. But if I'm like, "Yeah, like I'm open to hearing it. Like, what do you got?" And they feel like, "Oh, she's available for that," then they'll continue to share those ideas and feel comfortable doing so. So I really like that a lot.
Yeah, you also have to empower your people to do, like, my marching order is just to make a difference.
Mm,
That's what I tell my staff: make a difference. Most people in this profession know how to help people, they know what they want to do.
mhm.
So, you know, when it comes down to it, typically they do the right things,
Yeah.
so, and just have faith and trust in their ability.
Yeah. So you started, I mean, you've been in this first responder profession in some capacity for a couple decades,
Oh, 30 plus years.
30 plus years. How have you been able to create that longevity in your life? Because I would imagine everything that you've witnessed, that you've been exposed to throughout 3 decades can wear on you over time, whether that be, the traumatic incidences, shift work. How has that impacted you, and how have you been able to create that longevity in your life to be able to now be sitting in the chief of police role 30 years later?
Well, there's lots of aspects to it. There's, the friendships and the peer support that you get with other people that are in the profession. There's your faith, and purpose of life, and the whole meaning of life to you, and you have to also look at the negatives versus the benefits, and
Mm.
not always just look at the negatives that you experience, but how you've actually changed or helped somebody, and look at those wins, and the other thing is too is like going back to death investigations. um, I had a real hard time. I don't remember names. So like if you were to come up to me and say, "Oh, you were at my, dad's, death, and his name was," couldn't tell you, because I it's like a professional type separation where I look at it as what I'm there to do. Like as soon as you get into the human aspect that this is a person, then the feelings get into it. So, and there's everybody has their own way of, dealing with it, but I looked at it as the science. What am I trying to accomplish here? What am I looking for? Not that I'm trying to say that that person isn't worth me knowing their name. It's just a way that, I was able to cope better, is just look at it as the scene and the process,
Yeah.
of what we're trying to accomplish. Um, Other people, you know, know the name. They know. I mean, they know everything and totally are, treat the person as if they were real and human right this second, and we're having a conversation with them, and they can cope, and that's how they can deal with it. So I don't think there's one answer,
Mm.
and everybody has to find their own, way of coping with, the negative of any of the EMS, type professions. So again, it's too complex to just go and say this is the way it is, because each person has their own path and their own way of dealing with traumas, so that's a hard one to answer.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you that wellness is not a one size fits all. And I think as soon as we start blanket approaching everything, then people are gonna um, feel like they're missed, because like you said, maybe someone's gonna deal with it in the way that you did, and maybe someone's gonna deal with it in a completely different way. But the idea is that you have different options and that people understand different ways that they can cope with those things in a healthy way, different outlets that they can use. And you said for you, like having that connection to the mission or to your why. And then also, you said your faith. So, spiritual wellness was something that was important to you, I'm guessing. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And then you also look at sometimes, you're on an event and you just need some personal time, just space.
Yeah.
Other times you want to talk with people, sometimes you want space and then talk to people, so, peer support and help has to be based on the person's timeline, their timeline, and how they're dealing with whatever they were exposed to, so you can't just, like, as a chief, I can't just sit everybody down and expect them to open up their, hearts and minds, and do a brain dump. Um, Sometimes they might need the time. So what you need to do is make sure that they have the resources. They know that you can, you know, they can come to a, their peer, or, to me, or whatever, whenever they need it and when they feel it's the right time.
Yeah. What have you seen, in your experience for people who don't do that? For people who maybe don't want to deal with it at all and kind of just shove it down and keep going. How have you seen that impact maybe their, performance on the job or their home life. Can you give any insights into that?
I think people that aren't willing to deal with reality and just kind of shrug it off, they can shrug it off for a while and probably have really no outside observed effects.
Mhm.
But as you continue through it and the more and more and more you're exposed to this kind of stuff, it's going to start to trickle over or even pour over. And then you have relationship issues, law enforcement, and EMS, they have high divorce rates, you know, the lack of communication with your spouse or significant other, diminishes, it can turn into a real downhill spiral for a person. And then as the person goes down, of course, their tempers go up, their fuses get short. They, instead of just shrugging off something, it becomes, kind of ballistic, and they're very vocal, will curse at people and use of force tends to go up, so there's a lot of, little signs, and hopefully you can get into the person and, mediate that out prior to them having a significant impact where, we have to step in because of a policy violation or or an assault or, something like that. That could be a career ender.
Yeah. I really like that you said um, people who don't want to deal with the reality of what's going on. And I think that sometimes, like when you said that, because I can kind of refer back to experiences in my life where like you don't want to deal with it, right? So it's almost like you feel like, okay, well, if I don't deal with it, it's not real, right? And you saying like it's the reality of the situation, and you're going to have to deal with it no matter what. And that's either you deal with it now or you deal with it later. And from my experience, and it's exactly, what you just said, if you deal with it later, it's usually worse because those things stack, right? And everything kind of combusts or like, the lid pops off or your backpack gets too heavy or whatever analogy, you want to use. But um, you're going to have to deal with it no matter what. And so I think the message is like, how can we get you to proactively deal with it before it turns into a worse situation like use of force or unhealthy coping mechanisms, or have gotten so far into, impacting your home life that it ends in a divorce. Like, how are these things, how can we approach them before that? Because you have to deal with it no matter what. So we might as well deal with it now in a proactive way, in a healthy way, than letting it bubble to the surface in a detrimental way.
Yeah. I mean, that is totally the problem is though, is identifying, because some people, everybody has their different thresholds too of what they can take. And some people, they can see something's pretty horrific and it's just like, oh, shrug it off and let's go have, lunch. Other people, when they see the same thing, it's like almost like a life altering experience.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at people, you have to kind of try to read them, and I think when you bring on a new officer, that whole FTO process, field training and everything, is mainly about, developing a relationship with that individual to know kind of what their baseline is so
Yeah.
that you can know, um, and observe those changes. And then hopefully appear, I have that within my team where, an officer will come and say, hey, I was looking, or talking with so and so, and they just seem a little off, you know and that's kind of what you need, is you need to have, it's hard to get officers because it's not narking. It's actually looking at it and saying, hey, there's something here. I can't, I've said, hey, is something wrong? And they say no, but then to have that officer take that next step, report it, you know, for the benefit of the individual, not to punish them. And when you're looking at most dynamics, anytime an officer talks to management, if they think there's going to be a discipline aspect to it. And I think, as management, especially in law enforcement, we have to get out of kind of the IA mentality. If there's a policy violation and there's those kind of, true issues with an officer, of course we
Yeah.
have to follow those policies. But every little concern um, doesn't need to go that direction. And administrations have to kind of back up, look at the individual, help the individual, especially in law enforcement today where we don't have a lot of people coming into the field. We're all short. We need to walk beside our officers and help our officers, and retain our officers. And we can't really do that by piling on an IA on top of some mental trauma, you
Yeah.
know. So how to do that though, because of course there's legalities and everything is in the courts. You know that's a really hard thing for managements to really navigate. But how do we support our officers, come beside them, help them without always going with a penalty. you
Yeah.
know
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that having that messaging of like, we want you to be successful and we want to help you as much as we can. Like we're here to help you and not punish you if we can help it, right? And you had told me that you guys kind of take this philosophy of coaching rather than having some sort of investigation. So can you tell me a little bit about what that process looks like for you guys? Like, how do you coach them through certain things so that they don't have that added stress of discipline?
so it's kind of like I said, there's a fine line between coaching and if there's an action that we have to discipline.
Right.
But my deputy chief reviews every week body camera videos, and it's random, and he notices if there's a event that the officer didn't handle like we really want. Of course, law enforcement a lot of times isn't pretty, but most of the time we kind of go with the hey, be nice until you can't be. you know and then if the deputy chief in those body cam reviews sees something that's out of line, we'll have a discussion with the officer, or we'll have the officer review it and just say, hey, do you think you could have done better?
Hmm.
um, or why did because there could be something off camera or a body language or something else that we didn't catch in the camera, because the camera doesn't catch everything.
Right.
Might be a reason. So give that officer the voice to do it. Of course, if there's a total violation of policy, we're going to hold the officer accountable to that. But in most cases, if you can have the conversation, stop on the minor stuff, you can see the progression of throughout the officer's day, by the various stops, and the deputy chief will expand. If he gets a random, he'll go to another incident, within an hour or shorter time frame, review that body cam and see if it's a one and done incident, or is this a behavioral trend for
Mhm.
that officer, which is compounding.
Right.
you know so try to do that, and then just have open conversations with them. I call them in, my officers in pretty regular, we just have a conversation. I also tend to ask, how's home life going, how's the kids, how's the wife, you good,
Hmm.
and kind of look at their, because people bring their outside problems to work too. You can't just shut it off as soon as you walk in the door. So if you have a fight with your wife, you come into the office, of course you're going to be pissy, you know. So, and then are you going to take that, anger and transport it onto somebody else, and So we need to make sure that the person's not only healthy here, but they have a healthy home life.
Yeah. Yeah, and we talked a little bit about kind of the dynamics of wellness, and I do think that home wellness is a piece of that. And it's I would imagine challenging because you can't really, like, once they leave the building, you can't control what happens at home, but you can have resources to try to reduce the stress at work so that maybe it doesn't filter into home life. And I'm curious to know, how have you seen those efforts that you just went over with coaching and, trying to have different outlets? Like, I know we talked about different pillars that you think are really important within the organization as well, like mental wellness, physical wellness, spiritual, financial, nutritional, all the things that you're doing organizationally. How have you seen that impact overall wellness and reduce at least the stress that you can control within the organization?
One of the things we enacted, I mean, we're a small department. We have 5 full-time officers, a few part-time officers, and then one on-sworn, staff. So we're not really, big. We did create a gym, physical fitness. We have a spot that we're using for our defensive tactics training. We expanded that, bought some gym equipment, got council to approve up to 1 hour per shift on duty, exercise, walking. That's really been good. It gives people that, especially the night crew, they can come in and just walk, on a tread and, uh, and take a little personal time. And our, since we've implemented that, and that's been about 2 years, our workers' comp claims have went down.
Mm,
Also, the amount of sick time has also gone down. So, there's a direct correlation, with
yeah.
with that. And it's not that they've really lost any weight or became, super buff, but I think it just gives them the time to, you know, get rid of some of the stress, and then we're trying to implement, I'm looking at the whole person. What stresses my officers is they don't have enough money to pay for, the things and values and home life and things that they want. So how do we help them with that? And we're looking at adding some services where we have some one-on-one time with like a financial planner. Also dealing with, the city added paid life insurance, which they can supplement, just to take some of the, you know, some of that stress off, of what happens. I mean, if it's a line of duty death, that's completely different than if it's just, you know, an at home, whatever type of situation. We got really good medical insurance. Um, the mental health and having access to like the peer support and stuff, that's expensive,
Mm,
and it's really hard for an agency our size, this community our size, to pay for the, what we should be paying for, but trying to get, that buy-in. Um, I actually just had a meeting yesterday, and we're looking at doing a like a MTD with a bunch of departments to have a combined peer support to, kind of absorb that cost. And also, when you're a small department, if I'm personally having an issue, I might not want to talk to my partner because I may not want them to know exactly what's going on. So having somebody that's removed from that, inner circle that you could really be, you know, you could really unload on and know that it's not going to be um, used against you the next day, I think is going to be really beneficial. So, like I say, just trying to be there and be ahead of the problems, um, that's a challenge.
yeah. And we talked a little bit about this offline too, but do you think that there are unique challenges to being a smaller organization? I know you talked about funding, of course, and like, being able to talk to each other, but maybe there's a misconception that it's easier as a smaller organization to, um, be able to handle the call volume or the unique challenges of the career. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because one of the things that I've been really, really passionate about since I started working in this wellness space was that every single person matters and every single person needs the resources to be successful. And it does not matter if you are a small organization or if you are the largest organization or anywhere in between. So, can you give a little bit of insight into what you're seeing and the unique challenges of working within a smaller organization?
Yeah, I, I'll go to chief conferences and to meetings, and everybody's like, "Well, that must be really nice to be a chief in a small town. You just don't have to do much. You just go to lunch and drive around, have coffee, and that's not true. We Every problem that a big city has, we have. We
Hmm.
have assaults on people. We have domestic issues. We have drug abuse, alcohol abuse. We have everything that a big city has. You know, um, Maybe our homicide rates are lower, but we still have them occasionally. You know, um, People are people no matter where you live or where you go. Our workload is a little different because an officer may only be the only officer on with the county sheriff's department backing them, which could be 15 to 20 minutes, away. They also don't have the luxury of just, you know, take an initial, make the scene safe and then calling in, a whole nother unit to, do the crime scene and investigators do the interviews. I mean, it's their case. I mean, they do call in and we will support them. We'll bring in extra staff, but for the most part, the officer that, responds initially is going to be the officer that follows the case through, you know.
Yeah.
So like I say, we have the same challenges, the same exposures as any other department, no matter what size there is. And when you're in law enforcement, I mean, of course, we haven't had any riots in Bram, but there's the potential. I mean, when we had the riots in Minneapolis going on, there was some discussion about they thought one of the officers involved had some ties to Bram, and we heard that people were coming to Bram to protest, so we had to prepare for that, so those stressors of those, high incident, type things reach out and touch us too, so we're not exempt.
Yeah, and I think it's an important reminder, and it just kind of goes back to what we were saying before. I think sometimes we get in our own way, and if you have that preconceived notion of like, oh, they're just a small town, like they don't deal with XYZ, it's such a disservice for the community as a whole because I think that we have to understand that people are people and people need resources and everyone's going through stuff, whether that's work stuff or home stuff, and everyone needs the resources to be able to process those things. And the idea and the message should be we want everyone to be successful. It does not matter if you're in a small organization or a large organization, everyone should be successful, whatever that looks like, and there should be available resources to everybody. And you touched on this a little bit, and I want to kind of circle back to the challenge of funding resources because this is a conversation I have with a lot of smaller organizations where they're like, how do we do it? Like, how do we, like, we would love to have all of these things. We would love to have, the massage chair and the state-of-the-art gym and all the things that some of the other organizations do. But they're like, how do we do it? How do we fund it when we don't have that? And so, how do you balance that? Like, how do you balance the cost of implementing resources with the human and the financial cost of not doing it because we know the cost of not doing some of these things. So how do you balance that? How do you get buy-in from the city to be able to implement some of these things? What is your strategy?
Well, I look at things as proportion. So some of the neighboring agencies have three times our staff. it costs them 3 times more to, you know, put equipment on their belts and in their squad cars and such. If they have take home squads, their budget's going to be 3 times more in their transportation. When I became chief, I looked at that and said, our budget doesn't need to be what our neighboring agencies are to provide the same equipment,
Mhm.
right? In fact, Bram is ahead of most of the agencies around us in the equipment that we have. We, just got new rifles, new handguns. We have, you know, red dot sights on everything. We have 40 millimeters for less lethal. We have, you know, the gas or, I mean, we pepper ball. I mean, we have a ballistic rifle shield in each of our squads because one of the things is we don't have an SRT team that's going to be here. So
Mm.
most of the time, if there's a gunfight, our guys are going to have to deal with it. You know, so how do we do that? Like I say, I look at it as scale. I also look at it as a chief. If I provide them with everything they have to survive a fight, if something bad happens, at least I know I did everything we could do and then train them to do that. If I under equip them purposely just because of a dollar, you know, I'm going to have a hard time, with that. Plus, you know, I go to my council with that same thing. You're asking, not that this happens every day, but the citizens and the council expect that if some gunman is walking down the street or robbing our bank or doing a holdup, that our police are going to intervene and and take control.
Yeah.
If we don't have the equipment to do that, we can't. you know so when it comes down to hard reality, I don't sugarcoat it. I am, and this is the tools we need to do this job. If you want us to do this job, this is what we need. Our council so far has been very supportive of that. I mean, we do walk the line of, is it a want or a need? And I tend to look at anything that's going to value our officer, especially in an extreme incident, is a need.
Yeah.
you know, and I sell it as that. One thing I was going to circle back to on the previous conversation is that one of the issues that's significantly different for our police officers versus a large agency is that virtually every incident that we respond to, the officer knows the person and the family that they're dealing with.
Mm.
Where a larger agency with a larger population is responding to someone they have no personal interaction with. Okay.
Yeah.
So there could be a lot more, I believe there could be a lot more um, damage emotionally to the officer that has to deal with somebody that they've known for a significant period of time.
Yeah.
So,
I have never I've never had anyone say that, but that makes complete sense. I could imagine that that would be difficult to compartmentalize that when you have a close relationship with that person. I wanted to maybe ask you because you were talking a little bit about equipment and needing the things to be successful in this career. Do you think that we can have that same mindset for wellness, that there are certain things that are not nice to haves, but need to haves to equip everyone with the things that they need to be successful. And then furthermore, to be able to retain your staff, long term, because the one statement that you made that I thought was really powerful was like, as long as I know that I did that and I equipped them with everything that they needed to be successful, like I feel good about that because I know I did my job. Do you think that we can start spreading that same mindset about equipping, officers in all staff, sworn and professional, with the things that they need from a wellness perspective to be successful?
yes, I think though socially we have a lot to overcome in mental health.
Yeah.
Because mental health has always been a back burner, even with insurances. Your insurance companies didn't want to pay for certain mental health things until, very recently, where it's now they cover those things. Um, Mental health is also looked at negatively when you talk to somebody. Um, if you just were sitting there and you say, "Hey, I went to the doctor and they gave me a shot," or "I'm on this drug for high cholesterol," no big deal. It's something you would talk about around the water cooler. But if you went to have the same conversation, said, "Hey, I went to my psychologist or psychiatrist the other day, and they put me on a new drug for my depression," that's still taboo. I mean, people keep that private.
Hmm.
So with that mindset, the last thing you got to look at, and especially when it comes to law enforcement, uh, people don't want to be protected by somebody that has a mental health issue, because they all of a sudden they question, well, if they have a mental health issue, do they have judgment? Do they, you know, it gets into that whole scenario, and then they get questioned on everything they do. Law enforcement gets questioned on everything we do anyway,
Yeah.
you know. And then if you were to put onto it that, oh, the person was, seeing, a counselor, well, that cop is should unfit for duty, So when you have that stigma
Yeah.
in the whole, society, it's going to be very hard. It's harder to get a law enforcement officer to step up and say, "Hey, something isn't right here. I need help." You know.
Yeah.
So
I agree. I agree in the sense that I think there is still a stigma for sure. And I think that every state is different, every organization is different, every community is going to be different. My hope is that the more we can have conversations like this and the more we can recognize that, if you do see a counselor, it does not mean that you're not fit for the job. It means that you're human and you experienced something that was really hard for a human to witness, and you're getting the resources that you need to be able to grow and thrive in spite of or because that thing, and it's not it doesn't have to be a forever thing. It could be like, hey, like you saw an infant death and that would impact anybody. That does not mean that you are not fit to do this job. Let's, get you the resources you need so that you can process that and then you can move forward from that, without having to shove it down and it impacting your life in a negative way long term. I would argue too, and of course, you're so on point with like it's perception, right? Everyone's going to have their own perception on things, but I would argue that someone who is not doing those things and is instead choosing unhealthy coping mechanisms like alcoholism or whatever is more detrimental than going and seeing a counselor to talk about a hard thing that they went through.
I totally agree, and I also look at anybody that's willing to stand up. You look at uh, a person that abuses alcohol or drugs, and they raise their hand and say, "Hey, I'm doing this." That takes strength. And
Mm.
if a person witness something, knows that something's not right within their, in their own mind or their own coping, and they have the strength to reach out and get help, that should be a positive, and that actually, to me, character wise, means that that person does have character. They're trying to make things better. They're not just pushing it and living a lie, and one of the things in law enforcement is being truthful is like the number one, attribute of every cop is to be honest. And if you can't be honest with yourself, how can you be honest anywhere else? And if you're oppressed that, um, I mean, there's some difficulties. So, like I said, if any of my officers would come forward and say, "Hey, I need some time, I need to do this or that," great, you know.
Yeah. I really like that you said that because I actually had a mentor when I was coming up in my career that said something very similar to me because I was going through a really hard time and I was doing what a lot of people do. I shoved everything down and I didn't want to deal with it because it was really hard and there were a lot of things that had been down there for a long time and I was scared because I didn't. I knew that I put them down there for a reason and I didn't want to deal with those things. I didn't want to know what was going to like kind of come to the surface. And there was a moment where we were doing like a group exercise and it had made me very, very uncomfortable. And basically it was like a group like silent meditation, right? And this is why I'm very, very careful with the things that I do because I think you have to be cognizant of the fact that there are some people who have trauma that might not be comfortable in those certain situations, especially like in a group situation with undealt trauma and things that they had been through. But I was so incredibly uncomfortable. It was like a 10-minute silent, like we're sitting in a room together and I was crawling out of my skin. And at the end of it, I like ran out of the room and just burst into hysteria. Like I was just hysterically crying. I could not, like, I was like, I don't. And later I talked to this mentor of mine and I was like, I don't want to know. I don't want to know what's down there. I don't want to do that. And he looked at me and he said something very similar. He said, Paige, if you don't want to sit with yourself, how are you ever going to expect anyone else to want to sit with you? And it was really kind of that like eye-opening moment for me where I was like, wow, like I have to show up for myself if I want anyone else to be able to show up for me. You know, if I want someone to sit with me shoulder to shoulder and be there with me, I have to be willing to do that for myself. And I think that we do, like we are so good at helping other people and we forget about ourselves so often. And so I think that you're 100% correct that it is so strong and so courageous to be able to do those things. And you have to be able to help yourself if you want to show up for other people or you want other people to show up for you.
Plus, you're relatable. When you're talking with somebody, if you try to walk through life and help other people without having any life experience yourself, how? I
Yep.
mean, how? I mean, everybody has trauma. It's the experience of life. How do we cope with that? How do we help other people, you know, if we don't experience it ourselves and be able to relate, and
Um,
you know, I think, like I say, I think a person that can be honest with themselves is going to be a heck of a better, cop, therapist, EMS provider, because they're not hiding behind anything, you
yep.
know. And people know, when you're talking with a person in crisis, they can tell who's genuine or not, who's bullshit and who's not,
Yep.
And if you come at it, with your own life experiences, you're going to make a bigger difference than if you come in just robotic, and follow the procedures, So, I mean, like I said, mental health is going to be it is a big issue within law enforcement. How do we support the officer without jeopardizing their careers?
Yep.
That is something that is probably, I know it's above my pay grade. I'm just trying to be open, figure out how I can help my cops the best I can, but still maintaining safety and security, because I am giving them the right to carry a deadly weapon, going into somebody else's house to interject, you know, law and order onto that person. And I want to make sure that they're doing that with sound and justifiable, you know, um, means. So there is that, you know, balancing act, of is a person's mental capacity compromising their ability to actually, react and act appropriately, and again, giving an officer, if they're not, I'm not saying, if a person has an issue, it doesn't mean it's a a lifelong incident. They may need some time. They need to deal with their own skeletons, and
Yeah.
then they can come back. But how do we? in this profession handle that? That's a hard question,
Yeah.
you know. And I don't have the answer. We work through it. We do our best, you know. I mean, I wish we did have the answer, but again, I don't think we can because like we were talking about earlier, everybody's different, everybody's trauma is different, everybody's life experiences are different. So there is not one policy that fits all.
Right. In that same kind of thread is as far as like focusing on the individual, in the context of wellness, what words of wisdom would you give to the younger officer? Something that maybe helped you along the way, or maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier that would help each person or that individual to have a long and successful career.
Well, a new officer, I think what they need to do is take it all in. Just back up, watch as much as they can. I mean, sometimes they're forced to be completely solo and they have to just adapt. But I think hopefully they're with a person or an administration that will mentor them and watch their body cams and their reports and give them guidance and kind of that that support, even arousing. I think sometimes just being fun and kind of playing on a person's faults or giving them a little crap, it kind of ingrains a behavior and stuff into that person without making it negative. Also, if you're new, don't be afraid to ask questions of people that have been there. You
Mm,
know, you can't be in law enforcement more than a year and not have an experience that you can learn from. And just because you've been in a profession or EMS career for 30 years doesn't mean you can't learn something new, or have a different experience or learn through your officer's experiences, so you kind of have to be open to that too, and just kind of sit back, take a breath, um, and make time for yourself. um, Prioritize your family. Really sit back and write down, why are you doing this? What are your values? What do you want to get out of this career? What do you see yourself doing in this career? What's your accomplishments? What's your goals? How are you going to obtain those goals? Um, what do you want to do after this career? Is this a temporary career? And then you want to go on to something else? You have to, and then you also have to draw the line in the sand of what your physical thresholds are. What are you capable of dealing with before you have to pull the pin and just say, no, I'm out,
yeah.
and have that early so that when you get to that point, you can refer to it and say, hey, I said that if this was ever to happen to me, or if I was ever to, really do something to my family, or my family was, now taking the back seat, I'm out, you know, though that's what you need to do. You need to create your value system at the beginning and then hold yourself to it, and be accountable to those things that you said. Not saying that you can't adjust them as you go, because you'll learn more, but you still have to stay true to yourself.
Yeah. Thank you. Chief Stahl, I really appreciate your time coming on here and talking about wellness and sharing your words of wisdom. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. It was a good experience.
Of course. We'll talk soon.
Thanks.